It's important to understand that while I'll be talking about NRC's experience with the type of products you're interested in, I will not be talking about the results of specific evaluations.
他就说他在谈这个经验的时候呢，他不会具体谈那个具体产品的结果。请你们就是说要明白这一点，而且是很重要的。
The use of technical guides is restricted to the organization that paid for its development for the first 3 years after it is completed. Anyone else wishing to use the guide to evaluate a product must contribute to the cost of developing the guide.
他说，因为第一，在评估完成之后，技术指南的使用仅限于那个支付制定第一个3年评估指南的组织机构。任何人呢想用这本指南评估自己的产品呢，是要交费的。
Can the original proponent not allow another party to come in?
In addition, test results are proprietary until they are published in a CCMC report.
另外呢，就是这个测试结果呢，在那个 CCMC 报告公布之前呢，是他们专有的。
Instead, I will be discussing general issues and approaches to testing.
所以呢，他现在呢只是谈论就是一般的问题和测试方法，然后通过这种图形或者广泛的数据来说明一些观点。
Generic graphs with artificial data will be used to illustrate certain points.
然后呢，就是这些图形呢，你们就可以看到，就是说，比如说那个波美版里头的有些什么缺陷和障碍。
The first bullet up there, technical guides and restricted access for 3 years after completion. And then the other one saying share the costs afterwards. But you can come in and share the costs during the first 3 years?
Oh, yes. Yeah, no, afterwards they're open to anybody.
Open to anybody?
Yeah. It's a 3-year exclusive period.
So 就是3年之中，其他人要用那个技术指南的话，只要交费可以应用。3年之后呢，它就是会公开的，全部公开。
I should add something more. Part of the reason for this setup is that if there are 3 companies all wanting to, for instance, have a technical guide for wallboard, NRC should not be charging each of them the full cost for developing the same technical guide. So rather than doing that, we split the costs instead.
他说他们这样做呢，主要就是应该说是减少产品，比如成品成本就是那个费用。比如说有3家公司，他都想做这个产品的那个评价，然后呢用一本那个技术指南就可以了。那么呢，他们就说 OK， 一家给这么多钱，可能其他家就会缴费，就是这样，就减少那个成本。
A wide variety of products have been discussed with NRC in the last 3 years for manufacture with MDO boards. They include interior wallboard, tile backer boards, floor underlays, exterior wall sheathing, siding, rain screens, and structural insulated panels.
他说，在过去3年中呢，各种各样的产品已经和 NRC 有所那个协商，其中包括呢室内的墙板、瓷砖底板、底板的底层、外墙的护板、挂板，还有防雨屏幕，还有结构隔热板。
In looking at this list, it's clear that some of these products would be much easier to qualify than as complying with the National Building Code than would be others.
那么你们看到这些就是列出来刚才说的那些产品，你就可以知道有些产品呢就会很容易就符合那个规定，另一些呢可能就比较难。
Currently, one company has CCMC reports for magnesium oxychloride products for use as tile backer boards in kitchens and bathrooms and as a floor underlay.
有一家公司最近呢是得到了 CCMC 关于波美板用在厨房和浴室那个瓷砖底板和地面那个地面的那个就是垫层的报告书。
Another company is working through the CCMC process for a different application, which I can't talk about right now.
另外一家公司呢，正在为不同的应用呢，正在通过 CCMC 的那个检验程序，但是呢，它不会给大家说是什么样的公司，因为是正在过程中。
Discussions are underway with other companies as well.
还有其他公司呢，还在协商。
Developing a technical guide for a product requires attention to the unique properties of that product and where they might affect performance. In the case of MGO boards, durability is a key issue, particularly in outdoor applications.
制定一个产品的技术指南呢，需要注意这个产品的独特属性和可能影响产品性能的地方。比如像玻璃板这样的材料呢，耐久性就是一个关键的问题，特别是用在户外。
Over half the recent research publications on this material were on durability issues. Much of that work is, of course, being done in China.
他说最近就是超过一半对这种材料的最新出版的研究报告，都是和耐用性这个问题有关的，而且这些很多工作呢，在中国也在进行。
Leaching is a particular concern if the product will be exposed to water, whether indoors or out. Not only is there a risk that product strength might be affected, but free chloride ions will be released. Those ions will not only promote corrosion in fasteners, but may attack adhesives, causing disbonding.
这里呢就是他说无论在室内和室外呢，如果玻璃板的材料暴露在水，就是或者潮湿的时候，我这里写潮湿融化，但是我想可能是不对这个问题，这就是这个专业术语。那么这个它的意思就是说，这个板潮湿以后呢，会释放那个氯离子，然后呢会最终改变板的性能和腐蚀那些就是比如说螺丝啊、钉啊，这个我不知道leaching是什么什么，就这个是什么专业术语在中国？溶出。OK。然后呢，他是说这种现象呢，就是特别令人关注，因为这个不仅有影响产品强度的风险，而且呢，氯离子呢会因为这样呢被释放，然后就加快那个腐蚀这些紧固件，然后甚至呢造成那个那个粘合剂的那个脱落。
Magnesium oxychloride hydrates are generally more porous than Portland cement or gypsum-based products. This porosity may be an advantage or disadvantage depending on whether the board should be transmitting water vapor or blocking it. Exterior wall sheathing is an example where porosity is an advantage. Interior wall sheathing is not.
他说呢，玻璃板比那个水泥或者基本的那个石膏板呢，就有更多的空隙。这种空隙呢，可能是优势，也有可能是劣势。这就取决于玻璃板是用在哪里，是想要全疏那个水汽呢，还是要阻断那个水汽？比如说在外墙板内，他想把那个水汽散到那个户外，那就是一个优势。但是对那个内墙板来讲，就是一个劣势。
One area where we've seen little information is on interactions with soil chemistry. Some types of soil will attack standard concrete products. It would be essential to know whether similar damage could occur in MGO products, and it's possible a significant amount of long-term research might be needed to determine this information.
在我们建筑施工这个领域呢，我们可能很少看到与土氧化学相互作用的资料。那么有些类型的土壤呢会侵蚀标准的混凝土产品。那么知道类似的侵蚀是否可能发生在玻璃板上呢，是非常必要的。有可能需要一个不间断的长期的研究，才可以决定是否这种现象会发生。
So, in summary, Material properties that are important to a successful evaluation depend on the application. A number of different products have been discussed with NRC, but some applications will prove to be more difficult to qualify under the National Building Code than others. General areas of material concern include durability, in particular leaching, porosity, and potential soil interactions.
他现在就做这个总结，他说中药的材料特性对成功的评估取决于材料的应用。有若干的不同的产品已经和 NRC 进行商讨，但是呢，一些材料应用会比另外一种是更难符合这个国家规范的要求。材料关注的主要方面是包括耐用性，特别是和就是刚才那个榕树有关，空稀度和潜在的土壤分析相互作用。
We'll just go on to the end now for other questions.
OK， 有没有问题 ？Do you have any questions about this?
So for concrete products that have interactions with soil constituents, what is done to prevent that? Because
They, if you look in the concrete standards, there's a wide variety of different soil conditions that they deal with and other environmental conditions, and they add different supplementary cementing materials generally to modify the vulnerability, make this concrete more porous, but also change the chemistry. So it could be fly ash, could be blast furnace slag, but there's the concrete standards are books like that, and there's a cement standard as well, which is smaller but not that much smaller. And so there's been a lot of time and a lot of development gone into looking at those. Many of the testing approaches could be the same because it specifies what works in terms of identifying the potential problems and how you would test for them. But the results, I don't know yet.
what concrete
Sorry， 他的那个问题 ，Ken 的问题就是说，他是为什么那个这个混凝土和土壤有关？他就说这个有混凝土都会接触各种各样的土壤，而且呢，你水泥或者颗粒也有和那个土就是你们采用的材料也有关系，所以混凝土呢，它那个标准有就是很厚的一本，就是上面就是比较详细的说明这些问题。
I can talk more about concrete afterwards, perhaps, if you want.
Sure.
You have a CCMC listing for tile and backer board, does that cover interior wall board also?
No. It's a different application.
Mike 的那个问题就是说，他说有一家公司已经得到了那个就是瓷砖底板和地面那个垫层的那个报告书，那么那个户内的用板不可以用到这个报告书？他说不行，因为那个应用是不同的。
How did the tile backer board product, I mean, that's a wet use area, I would think. How did you go about qualifying that?
We are in the process of requalifying in that area.
Okay. New knowledge has come since?
Yeah, I would say so.
Right.
Requalified means
So the product was initially qualified as tile backer board, but we are now going through additional testing because of durability issues.
OK， 彼得的问题就是说，他说你那个就是这个刚才就是我说的那个报告书，在厨房和浴室里头用的那个，他说也就是说在潮湿的环境里头用。那么他说他们现在在重新做这个评估，那评估的那个主要的问题就是说耐久性，他们还在重新做。本来是 qualify， 现在又回过头再做这个耐久性的
So
问题。
then, once you have issued a technical guide, etc., and new knowledge comes along, then you'll reopen the file.
You may have to reopen the file.
Yes.
Peter 的那个问题就是说， 比如说你已经制定了一个那个指导指南、技术指南，说要做测试，但是在测试的当中，你们又发现有新的问题，那么或者是已经通过了，也发现有新的问题，那么他就会重新开这个案件又要重新开出来再做。
Do you reopen the file after the 3-year renewal, or do you open it midterm?
I'm not, that one you'd have to check with the CCMC. I've only, I suspect it would depend on what new knowledge has come out and what the safety risks are.
Safety issue.
If it's a serious safety issue, they would have to reopen it immediately if they became aware of it.
他现在就是说你那个结论定出了以后，如果是有些问题出来了，那么他们这个测试过程又重新做，也不是重新做，就是要把这一部分的东西要加进去。那么他的那个问题就是说，你加进去是3年后，就是你们从评估的时候做呢，还是就任何时候加进去？他不太清楚，但是呢，他是认为就看你就是这个重新发现的那些问题有多重要。如果是和安全有问题的，可能就会马上做。
Are you working collaboratively with Chinese research facilities now, or just reading papers that you?
Reading papers that I can actually read.
We can help you with that.
But no, we're not working collaboratively with Chinese research facilities right now. I mean, our major focus is the technical guide evaluations. And anyway, we can talk about that after this.
那个彼得的那个问题就是说，他说你现在John 现在是有没有？只是因为刚才他提到，就是很多那个研究报告里头就说到，这个波美板的问题都是和耐久性有关。他那个彼得的问题就是说，你究竟是只是读那些文件，就是学术报告，还是有和中国的一些科研机构有接触？他说，到目前为止，他只是读那个科研报告。
我问一下，这个有一个公司得到这个报告书，是不是这个意思？他这个产品就可以用了，是这个意思？就准许用了。
So you say there's one company already got the CCMC report. That means they eligible. They are eligible to use in the North America.
Well, in Canada.
In Canada. 他说现在是可以用了，特别是在加拿大。
我再问一下，他这个耐久性这个检测主要靠用什么方法来检测？
They said there's the durable problem in the this board. So what kind of method you will use it for testing?
We'll talk about that in a minute.
他说一会他会说。
More and then.
I understand that technical guides are not really final documents, that they're reevaluated each time you have
Yes.
an enterprise.
Or they can be if necessary. So if new information arises, then the technical guide has to be revised, and the products may have to be reevaluated.
Mike 的那个问题就是说，他说那个他大概知道，就是这个技术指南不是最终的一个报告或者是一个技术的那个版本。他说会经常重新评估，如果有什么新的问题出来，他们又会重新的更新和加进去，然后。
这个技术指南是不是就相当于一个产品标准？
不是，技术指南只是说你在测试之前，它会根据各种各样的因素、各种各样的标准，然后呢，它会做一个指南来指导测试的过程。
但是你标准里实际是包括这些东西的，是不是因为你波美版没有这个标准，所以你要制定这个指南？如果你某种产品有标准了，是不是？
它就修改，然后就变成你。
不需要再制定这个指南，是这个。
它也要，但是就特别对你们那个产品。The question is, he's a little bit confused about this technical guide, it's the same as the report.
No.
I say no, it's just the beginning, you do the design or consideration and put it in the guide and to guide the testing.
The guide describes how to test. The report is the actual results of the test.
对，它的技术指南就是它写出来以后，它会考虑很多因素，认为你那个产品可能会有些什么问题，然后他就写这个一个指南，然后那些实验室就根据这些指南就做各种各样的那个测试。Then here's another question. He said that this board example, it's quite similar as gypsum board. Maybe it's already have a technical guide. Then why do you still need the right?
Not for,
Or maybe some similar
Yeah.
product, it's already have a technical guide.
the gypsum board would be used as a baseline for comparison to, but gypsum board, what happens is at the beginning of the guide process, CCMC evaluates the product and says, is it the same as another product? Or is it similar to another product? And then decides whether it needs a full technical guide or not. Because the chemistry is different and the things that can go wrong with it are not the same, and the structure is even different, they have to have a full technical guide for this.
Okay.
But gypsum might be a comparison. In fact, gypsum is a comparison for some
Okay, so
applications.
他刚才说的那个就是说你们那个 technical guide，就是这个技术指南刚开始要有一个基准点，它就是这个，就是说它会根据评估你们那个产品，就是刚开始你申请的时候，它就先那个检核，就比如说你有些什么成分啊，用在哪里呀、这些，然后呢，它就会找就是比较相似的产品，然后就用那个来作为基准，然后呢再写它那个技术指南。那么，因为他说要重新写的技术指南呢，是因为比如说你们那个化学成分和其他的不一样，但是比如说你现在这一个报告已经出来了，已经有一个技术指南了，那也许他会把这个拿过来，然后呢就把你那个申请你比如说的应用方面不一样的地方加进去，然后就成为他那个报告。
All right, so the final part of this talk is going to discuss product variability and quality control. Acceptable performance in these areas is essential to product acceptance in North America, and from what we've seen is an area where improvement is needed.
Continue.
I'm going to be blunt about the problems in this area because they are a substantial obstacle to your success in exporting material to North America. And my comments aren't because I have any inherent issues with MGO boards as a construction material, but because these are things that need to be addressed for the success of the product.
他说现在呢是讲那个最后一部分，就是对这个产品的稳定性和质量控制。他说令人满意的性能呢是产品能否被北美接受的关键，也是需要改进的地方，因为那个产品的稳定性和质量控制是你们成功出口到北美的一个相当大的障碍。他说他会用比较技术性的语言来强调这些方面的问题。他的意见就是说，作为结构材料，这些问题这些他现在发现的问题，不是因为波美板它本身的天然特性造成的。
I want to reiterate that quality control and production appears to be a significant impediment to the acceptance of MGO products in North America. Focusing on Canada, quality assurance measures are a part of every technical guide, and quality standards must be met for a successful evaluation.
他是想再次重新生产质量那个控制，是波美板在北美验收过程中的明显障碍。他特别对加拿大来讲，质量的那个保证措施是对成功评估技术指南和质量标是必 必不可少的一部分。
The expectation is that batch-to-batch properties will be the same. Analysis of material samples to date shows, however, an undesirable degree of variability.
首先，他说他们期望就是每一批的生产出来的材料性能呢，应该都是都是相同的。但是在目前，就是他们测试过以日期显示不同的那些样本来说，就发现那个质量参差不齐，很不令人满意。
The key areas of inconsistency include board chemistry, mechanical strength, and the effects of leaching. I will discuss each in more detail.
它的质量不一致的那个重点呢，集中在于波美板的化学成分、机械强度和那个就是受潮湿影响的这三部分。他说下面呢，他对每一项呢做详细的谈论。
Board chemistry will usually be investigated by X-ray diffraction and X-ray fluorescence measurements.
它波美板的那个化学成分呢，是通过X 射线颜色和那个 X 射线荧光测量来进行检查。
The expectation is that the chemistry will be essentially the same between batches, although a small amount of variability and the presence of non-toxic trace elements are acceptable.
那么一般呢，他们期望这些化学成分呢，在每批次的产品呢，都应该基本相同。不过有一点点不同的成分或者没有害的微量元素存在呢，是可以接受的。
Tests on commercial boards from some suppliers show a wide variation in chemistry between batches, including possible contaminants. These variations may indicate that the supply was actually from different manufacturers rather than one, or that the manufacturing plant had production problems.
那么他们在测试中呢，就发现一些就是商业用的板，从不同的批次里头，在测试的时候质量那个相差就很大，甚至呢，他们发现可能有些污染物存在。那么这些质量的那个差异呢，他认为是那个供应商肯定是不是从一家厂家收购而来，而是从不同的厂家收购的产品。也就是说，那个制造工厂里头呢，就是有生产的问题。
Regular checks on board chemistry are likely to be required as a part of a quality control manual.
所以呢，说定期检查化学成分有可能会被要求作为质量控制手册的一部分放到技术指南里头。
Mechanical properties are typically evaluated through flexural strength testing or similar mechanical methods.
它的机械性能的那个测试呢，一般是通过弯曲强度测试或者类似的机械方法来评估。
In Canada, structural use of a product requires knowledge not just of the average strength of the product, but also of its strength distribution. Structural design is done using the 5% cutoff strength, which will be illustrated in the next slide, rather than the average value. As a result, material strength variability will reduce the design strength of the material, even if the average strength is the same as a less variable material.
就是前面已经说过了，在加拿大用于结构上的产品生产需要的数据呢，不只是考虑产品的平均强度，而且呢还会考虑那个强度的分布。结构设计是用5%的，它叫截断强度做参数 ，cut off。我会用那个下一个幻灯片来说明这个结构不是用平均强度值来作为参数的，因而呢强度那个变化比较大的范围的就会降低那个材料的设计强度。即便那个平均的强度相同，对两个那个产品来说，那么那个强度变化少的那个材料呢，那个结构参数就会相对比较低，就是高一点。那么变化比较大的就会低一点。这个就是他们那个比较。
Two different strength distributions are shown on this graph. They have the same average strength and the same number of samples were tested for each distribution.
这个幻灯片呢，就产生了2个产品，然后呢，用了同样就是数量的那些样本来做测试，然后呢，它那个平均的强度是一样的。
The 5% cutoff strength is a value that marks the lowest 5% of the curve area and is used for design. As you can see, a less variable material therefore has a higher design strength than a more variable material.
那个5%的就是5%的那个切断强度是在曲线面积那个范围内，然后就是标志在最低端的直线那个直线的位置上。那么在这个值用来作为这个值就用来作为设计的参数。比如你看到那个强度分布变化比较小的，就是红色直线，那个材料就比强度分布范围比较大的材料，就是那个黑色的直线，那个就有较高的设计参数。
So that one would be between 9 and 10, the design strength would be like 9.5?
9.5,
Okay.
something like that, as opposed to 8.5. And of course, the more variable it is, the lower the strength.
Okay.
Controlling batch-to-batch variability is even more important for qualification than controlling within-batch variability. It is expected that the strengths of different batches will be statistically the same. Measurements are done on multiple samples from different batches, and the average strength and variance determined for each batch. The analysis of variations, or ANOVA method, will be used on the data, and the results should be the same at the 95% confidence level.
它是控制不同那个批次产品的强度分布稳定性，要比那个同量的批量产品的强度分布的稳定性更为重要，因为人们一般都预计或者期望就是不同批次，但是是同样产品应该有相同的那个强度，然后我们从不同批次的产品每批取出的多个样品做平均强度和分布的测试，通常用那个统计学的变化分析和方法来分析的数据，结果呢，它们应该是基本相同的，而且那个确信值呢，应该是达到95%以上。
Some batches from nominally the same plant show unacceptably different results.
但是他们从他们那个测试的结果来看，就是不同的产品。不同批次的产品就是日期不一样，但是同一家工厂生产出来的，取出的样本测试，却显示出很大的差别，结果就是比较难以接受。
Here's an example of results from batch-to-batch flexural strength testing. The dots represent the average strength of each batch, while the bars represent the standard deviation.
它这里呢，就是显示出就是不同批次的产品做的那个抗弯度测试的那个例子。红色那个断线中间的一点是表示平均强度，那个短线那个长度就是表示偏差。如果是越短，就说明它们那个偏差越少，那个越多。
As you can see, the results from batch 2 fall far below those of the others. In addition, the results from batch 4 are probably not statistically the same as those from batch 1. The batch 4 results might be statistically, let me restart again. The results from batch 3 are probably not statistically the same as those from batch 1. The batch 4 results might be statistically the same as those from batch 1 and 3.
他说这里你可以看到第2批的结果，它那个强度就是远远的比其他3批就低很多。然后呢，从那个统计学的那个角度来讲呢，第4批的结果和第1批呢 也不一样，因为第4批那个偏差比较短，然后第4批比较短，第1批就比较长。那么就是说，在每一批的那个质量参差不齐的话，第1批就比那个第4批要多。然后呢，不过呢，他就说，他们也可以说，就是第4批的那个产品呢，和第3批呢，也算是比较接近。
A product showing this type of batch-to-batch variation would be unlikely to be qualified for as complying with the National Building Code.
他说，一个同样的产品，在不同批次出产中显示出强度和它那个分布不稳定的状况，是不太可能符合加拿大国家建筑规范的规定的。
Ideally, flexural strength and other properties should be minimally affected by leaching. If they are affected, the batch-to-batch variability should be minimal. Tests on samples instead show a wide variation between batches in the effects of leaching on flexural strength. Some samples show significant loss in strength, others little loss, and still others show a slight increase in strength.
他说，在理想的情况下呢，弯曲强度和其他的性能应该是尽量不受潮湿的影响。如果它们受的潮湿影响呢，就是批次间的产品，它那个受影响的差距应该是非常小。那么在他们对样品的测试中，他们就发现批次之间的产品，这个抗弯强度受潮湿的影响有很大的差异。那么这里就看见，一个是降低那个强度降低很大，另外呢只是降低一点点，另外一个呢最后一个是它甚至可以就是比原来增加。
John, are you, all of these are from the same factory supposedly, nominally the
Different
same
batch.
supplier?
They're from different batches, and the variability depends, like, different samples we've got in have been, where we've been told that they're from the same factory, have been wildly different.
Supposedly, right.
Yeah, so, you know,
They all should be the same.
they all should be
favorable.
essentially the same.
彼得的问题就是说，他说你们做这个实际上是是不是一家工厂或者是一个批次？他就说他们从产品就可以看出，就是那些产品是不是从一家的或者不同批次的。那么这个呢是指一家就从一家产品不同批次所做出来的结果。
Consistency here is again critical for qualification under the National Building Code.
他说，如果就说他说再次强调，我们那个质量的稳定性对产品达到这个国家的规范要求是至关重要。
One thing that I haven't put in there, but I should add. Well, these are examples of problems. Other samples have been much more consistent, and are more suitable for use as a building product.
他说，如果是这个产品，就是说，比如说它的质量那个比较稳定，然后所有的那个受影响的程度也比较，就是也是稳定，然后所有的产品都相对的质量都相对稳定，没有什么差异，那么就比较对适合就是在使用里头，大家的欲求就比较满意。
Consistent boards from the same factory or different?
As far as I know, the same factory.
How many samples from each batch?
10 samples.
So was there any intra-batch variability, like the same batch, but variability within that batch?
Well, if we go back to this,
Oh, yes, yes. I see.
that's the variability within a batch.
Within the batch, yeah.
Okay, and the extent can be very broad or pretty tight.
Ken 的那个问题就是说，他说你们怎么就是挑选多少样本，就从一批的产品里头，他说他们挑选10个，那么他就说你们就是每一批的产品那个质量究竟是不是相差不齐？ 那么就从这个里头就可以看到，就是那个线拉的比较长的，就是指那个产品的质量就是差的比较多；那个线拉的比较短的，就是产品的质量就比较接近。
So a batch, sorry, is 1 day's production, 1 lift. How do you define batch?
Usually, a batch is the production delivered to the supplier in Canada with at least from a certain, like it could be a container load or whatever's coming in from at one period.
Right.
And for multiple batches, we specify a minimum of 2 weeks between the batch.
So the date stamp of production.
There's a date stamp of
basically.
production, yeah.
彼得的问题就是说，他说你怎么确定他那个就是批次？他就说那个批次呢，就是他们你那就是出口的那个上面有那个日期，那么他们采用呢就是在不同就是2个星期不同的那些产品。
So summarizing this section, consistent material properties are essential for demonstrating compliance with the National Building Code. Canadian suppliers of MGO boards must have quality control manuals for a successful product evaluation by CCMC. The products must be consistent between batches, and quality will be checked using methods capable of assessing batch-to-batch variability. And in general, for any construction product, good quality control is essential for a successful product.
他呢就是对整个演讲的总结，他说，稳定的材料属性对证明能够符合那个国家规范的要求是至关重要的。加拿大的玻璃板供应商必须有CCMC 产品成功评估的质量控制手册。它的批次之间的产品质量必须相同，不同批次的质量将会使用能够评估差异的方法来检验。良好的质量从就是综合来讲，就是对任何产品，良好的质量是成功产品的关键。
We've been wrestling with how to measure chloride ions. Are you using the X-ray fluorescence as a method?
No, not for chloride ions, just two different things, sir. There's the chemical composition of the boards as delivered,
Yep,
and we would use X-ray diffraction for looking at the crystalline structure,
Yeah.
the compounds, X-ray fluorescence for looking at the elements that are present, but that's not chloride ions, that just says chlorine is present. The chloride ions are measured by grinding up a sample of a specific size, placing it in water of a specific volume
yeah.
for a specific amount of time, and then measuring how much free chloride ions are in the water.
彼得的问题就问，他就说你那个用 X 射线来测的那个是不是测试那个氯离子释放？他说不是。他们用来就是测试你那个成分，就是那个产品里头有什么成分。刚才不是说了，应该是有杂质没问题，一点点，有无害的物质也没问题。但是呢，他们发现可能有一些就是污染物在里头。那么他说测离子的话呢，它就是要弄成线粉末，把那个就是这个板要弄成粉末，然后放在水里，然后再看它有没有释放的氯离子。
So the X-ray diffraction, that's a test that would be going to a university likely.
No, Intertech should be able to do that. Yeah, I would expect Intertech to do that for you.
Oh, they have that?
They should have, or if not, certainly other testing companies do.
Would a university count in that sort of test?
Maybe. XRD's,
They're hungry.
yeah, XRD is something that's not very difficult
You have to boy.
to do if you have the equipment. But it's not like there has to be unusual training. So, but that one you'd have to address with Bruno, because I can't give you a yes or no on it.
Yeah.
Peter 的问题就是说，他这个 X-ray 的那个测试，是不是可以由学校来进行？就是我们昨天去 UBC 然后他说他是预计可能用那个天祥公司来做， 那么彼得就是说他们有设备，他们能够做。他说现在他还不能确定。
X-ray fluorescence is also very common in chemical laboratories. Both techniques are used quite a bit in mining industry, for instance, so any testing company that serves the mining industry should be able to do those techniques.
Would the accreditation be the same?
It should be.
Okay.
他说那个实验室，甚至就是一些矿物实验室里头，他们都有资格做，就是比如说采矿的那些。
它那个污染物主要指的什么东西？
Said you said you found some likely found some contaminate material in the balls. He said, what is that?
Okay. Some samples had silicon compounds. So there wasn't just silica, which you might get in the board, but it had, let's see, there's actually a long list, so I'm not sure.
他说他们发现了有就是比较长的一类的那种，不是只是一种产品，就比较长的一产品。但是他是肯定这些产品不应该就是在就是标准的那个产品里头。
They're compounds that I would expect might be coming from the mining process, or because they didn't fully process the raw materials.
他就说他这些发现的这些污染物，有可能就在采矿的时候或者什么给混在一起，还是怎么样？他是这样。
他确定这是什么成分吗？
他说很长，好几种。
是不是他没有分析说具体是什么东西？
他说他有出来，他就有一部分他讲了一个就是 silicon，I don't know in Chinese silicon 那个硅方面的东西，硅酸盐方面的东西。
硅为什么是污染物？
它可能不只是硅酸盐，但是就是说，反正是属于就是有污染，而且他说还有一个，他说污染的时候就是说，应该是不属于这个产品里头的成分，那么可能在某些地方会造成一些危害那些产品。他现在没有说。他说无害的杂质，他说一点点他是可以的，这个和污染没关系。
污染物呢，就是很有害的东西。
对 ，he said he's really want to know what material.
Okay, well, I can pass on the specific compounds. I don't have the full list with me, but I can
you send
send it to Peter
Peter?
and he can forward it.
他说他现在还没有这个清单在他这里，但是呢，他会到时候发给彼得，让彼得再发给你们，你们就可以看。
Can you talk a little bit more about, I think you mentioned presence of toxic materials, but other hazardous materials, like you just mentioned silicates. How is that viewed upon? Can you elaborate a little bit more about silicates in particular?
In general, silicates would not be something I expect to find in these boards.
You wouldn't?
No. The point was that I was finding some odd compounds in some of the boards that were supplied, but a properly manufactured board should not have silicates in it, except that there is some sand added to the boards. But that's not the same thing as the odd chemistry we were seeing.
Okay, because we've been having discussions with board suppliers here, and they equated the presence of fly ash with silicates. And I know you're a cement guy, so.
I don't think these would have been what we get from fly ashes. Fly ashes, no. I would expect, given what the chemical compounds involved are, that anything that's happening with the fly ash should, if there's a reaction product which may involve silica, it should be a magnesium compound as well. I don't see how you could just get to a straight complex silica compound. So the silicates that could be in there if you're using fly ash as an additive or blast furnace slag, you get some calcium, magnesium, oxide, hydrates, you get some fairly complex chemistry.
So, like our position on it is, we don't want any hazardous material for breathing, you know, like a
Yeah.
hardy plant. So, you know, we've said back to the supplier, you know, there can't be any silicates.
But that would be sand. I mean, you might be better off saying you don't want any sand or equivalent to sand.
Okay.
Because in general with something like hardy board, the sand, the reason there's silicas in there in the first place is because they're including sand to a certain percentage. It's the same thing as concrete or mortar. You've got sand mixed into it, and that's where the silica comes from.
Okay.
It should not be part of the actual chemistry of the board unless something really odd's going on.
But it's not the it's not the harmful material.
Well, silica itself, if it's in the sand, if it's in the board or whatever the product, you have to have respirators because you can get silicosis, which is a lung condition. So that's why they're trying to avoid it, is because if you don't have, you have to take less precautions. And this is where some of the health and safety stuff in the technical guide comes in, is there may be a requirement to specify the use of respirators if the product has silica in it.
OK， 刚才那个 Ken 的问题就是说，他说这个 silica 就是硅性的一些物质，为什么不可以在你那个这个波美板里头存在？比如说，他刚才说是有没有可能是因为烧那个就是那个烧的一些粉灰会不会包括在里头？他说可能性不大，可能是一些沙子或者沙子里头就有这个。我说那这个是不是有害？他说这个呢就是如果是有这些东西的话，你在锯这个是板的时候，在加拿大你就一定要戴那个防护罩，因为你会吸进去，把那个粉尘吸进去。所以他说按照这个就是你们的那个成分是应该没有这些东西的。然后现在那个水泥纤维板。他们现在所用的水泥纤维板就有这个问题，我们要锯它用它的时候一定要带这些东西，所以你们就尽量不要有这些东西。
它那个二氧化硅是那个，因为它这个主要原料氧化镁是用天然的磷镁石煅烧产生的。
这个
磷镁石是在自然界里存在的，它是很有可能带进二氧化硅的。二氧化硅主要是沙子的主要成分。
Do you get like every ball has this kind of material, or just some of them have some?
Okay. There's the silica, or does he mean what I thought was unusual chemistry? Does he mean the unusual chemistry or the silica that Ken was talking about?
Silicon. Yeah, they said that this kind of material, like you say, maybe is from the mining.
Yeah,
Because they use a raw material.
We had some different batches. Each batch had different chemistry rather than consistent chemistry. None of them, some of them weren't fully processed or weren't fully, the chemicals weren't fully reacted. Others had things that just looked like contaminants. But that was from one group of samples.
So if
Different phase of the magnesium oxychloride cement?
No, it is not. I mean, different phases can be picked up by the XRD. You can see that there's, I think there's 5 different phases are possible. Typically, you're getting a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
But these aren't different. I mean, that's not an issue. We can identify what those are. This was, as I said, some of it was unreacted products, so there was, some of it had more magnesium oxide still in it than I would have expected. Some of it was more magnesium hydroxide, which means the board wasn't made properly. And some of it was other things that seemed to have come from an outside source. But it was one group of samples, not everything we've seen.
But if the process is complete, it's okay or improved?
Well, it depends on what the chemical analysis shows. I mean, what we're looking for would be fully reacted, a reaction that's gone to completion, so there shouldn't be any magnesium oxide. There probably should not be significant magnesium hydroxide, and because one shows there wasn't enough water, the other shows there was too much water, and but there should also there shouldn't be things that don't make any sense being in the board, which is what we were seeing.
他就说，他就得到这些物质是从一组的那些产品里头，得到的，就是说不是每一个产品都有，然后呢，他也发现了有些就是有些那个成分，它是完全已经就全部反应了，有些呢就还有一部分没有反应，不是说那个硅，就是说同那方。有些呢就是有这样的成分，那么另外呢有另外一样的成分，就是很参差不齐，这是它的一个主要的那个，那个就是污染物那个，等你们拿到 Peter 那个你们再看。
What I can say is that from what we've seen, I believe samples that were made using automated methods are much more consistent than samples that were made without automation.
他说那个生产线如果是自动化的话，那么那个产品的那个质量稳定性就比较好一点。如果不是自动化的那个产品的质量就相差很多。
We sent you a few samples of magnesium oxysulfate. Did you?
I haven't done a thing with it. Sorry. It's different chemistry. Many of the same tests would be applicable, but we'd have to sit down and think about, okay, if first, does it leach in the same way? And if it does, what's the implication of the sulfate coming out rather than the chlorides? So you probably don't have the same corrosion, but.
彼得的那个问题就是说，他给转的一些就是那个硫酸镁的那个产品，问他做了试验没有？他说现在还没做试验，他现在也不知道究竟那个结果会怎么样。
On the chloride question, the Chinese have a similar method for measuring chloride ions. And they've told me that they can achieve a 3% dissolved chloride level. Would that be acceptable to the CCNC?
The way we deal with the chloride, okay. First of all, it depends on the application. 3% of a massive board in chloride ions is still pretty high. It's typically higher than you get in salt in concrete before it causes failure in the concrete, but that's not necessarily the same issue. So it depends a lot on the application. If you're dealing with a interior application like a wallboard, where you're not likely to get anything regular water exposure, it's probably irrelevant. For something where you're going to get some water vapor exposure, or it might be exposed to rain, say during construction, we have other tests to simulate those conditions, and we can see how much comes off if you're in a rain during construction situation, for instance, which may require, and if that's a problem, they may require, well, almost certainly would require that the boards are stored covered during construction period, but might require quick covering over with a barrier if there's a problem when the rain's actually striking the board when it's on the wall of the house. But okay, go ahead. Sorry.
So, Mike 的那个问题就是说，他说我们中国有那个就是测试氯气那个氯离子释放的那个方法，然后就说达到3%。他说可能不可能通过这个 CCMC 的标准。他就是说要根据那个用途来不一样来决定。他说，比如说用在室内的板，如果不是在潮湿的环境里头，那么也许可以用，但或者是放在墙外板，就是墙外的板，然后很快就被其他就是外墙那个装饰盖上，那么也可以用。那么还有的话就是说，那个释放也有可能就是说你储存在一个什么地方储存的好，如果是放在潮湿的环境和放在不潮湿的环境又不一样。
For applications where there might be water vapor or moisture present and you've got fasteners using to attach it to the wall or where those fasteners might corrode, we have tests that actually involve putting the fasteners in the boards and exposing them to moisture conditions under an accelerated basis. And then we can, based on those tests, we can say whether you can use a regular fastener, coated fastener, or you have to use 316 stainless steel.
他就说，这个如果是暴露在户外的那个环境的话，他们可以用就是把这些板放在那个很潮湿的那个环境下，就是加速他们那个释放，就看看对这个腐蚀，就是那个固件腐蚀的程度在哪里，然后再决定可以不可以用。
这个幻灯片52提到这个结构设计用到的强度，就是你这个波美板要用在承重结构吗？
如果结构构建，the question is talk about the 52 slides, and he said this is the testing for the mechanical property, and said the board used for what do you call that? Support and like have a loading or just any board?
The boards are cut into coupons, and then we use 3 to 4 coupons per board.
No, the question is say the board is used for loading or maybe just used for the interior design. You still need this kind of mechanical.
Okay. The strength value is different. For interior wallboard, you have much lower strength requirements.
他就说这个结构的强度是对不同的要求有不同的测试，但是每一种板你都要有一个结构的强度，就算是用在那个户内的板，你那个就是你本身那个板的结构强度有一定的要求，不是说就是作为一个结构的构建，就是本身板的结构要求。
One more question on the chlorine. So there's no actual sort of limit, if you will, on how much you can have?
It's performance-based. So it's always looking at the application, what the equivalent material is, what the environment would be, and whether it has the same function, the same performance as an equivalent as what's covered by the National Building Code. So there's no specific limit. It would be hard to, for instance, in concrete, because there's a long experience with concrete in terms of corrosion, they have set salt limits that are allowed in the concrete going in. We don't have that extent of experience here. And so rather than doing it through a specific limit, which is we do it through the performance, which is what the code's really geared to anyway.
OK， 那个Mike 的问题就是说，他说是不是有一个直线，极限值，就是说你那个就是那种金属固件被腐蚀的那个程度，他就说我们没有极限值，每一个不同应用的那种板类就有不同的要求。
这个批票公司它正在制定一个这个氧化镁板的标准，它这个标准需要哪个部门来给它就是批准，批准以后就是先说这个问题。
这个标准，你们可能就是明天下午会讨论这个问题。那么他们是，你看那个 slide 可能就是给你的那些上面他要讲。
这个标准就是最后要实施，需要哪个部门来批准
？John, the question is, okay. Moca and Peter, it's going to set up the standard for the mechanism supply board. And the question is, who has the final approve this design?
The standard values, that's
CCMC or?
standards are generally written depending on the product application.
They already have
So,
the jobs?
but if it's a specific, generally there's say there's a different standard for gypsum if you want to use it as an interior wallboard as opposed to using it for exterior purposes.
Yeah,
And so it's a different standard, so
Yes.
they have to select the application, and then based on that, the final say, any standard process is one that involves a lot of negotiation, so I don't know who in particular would have the final say in that case. It's partially based on the National Building Code requirements for the application, but usually standards are set to produce a product that will meet the minimum requirements of the National Building Code every time.
So this, the standard, whether the product meet that standard or code, who say they meet or not? Is it CMMC or CCMC?
If you have a CSA standard, for instance, so if you have it depends if you're talking about a self-generated industry standard or an official standard. If it's a CSA standard or an ASTM standard, the standard body writes a standard. Its values are based on building code requirements. And then anybody who wants to say their board qualifies to that standard has to demonstrate it meets those strength requirements.
So they do the testing?
The testing
according
has to be done. The testing has to be done. Standards usually may specify testing requirements or they may not, but they will specify expected values.
他就说，就是不同的应用当然有不同的标准。那么呢，加拿大有加拿大的那个，就是产品标准，美国有那个美国的产品标准。那么这个如果你可以通过 CCMC， 也可以就是你做这种标准，如果你通过了，你证明了，那么就像刚才我们说的那个政府官员认为你那个产品能不能用，不是有两种途径吗？一种就是说，他那个专业的工程师说，我认为这个产品达到标准，那么他认为的时候，他可能就用，那个ASTM 或者是另外一个测试的那个标准已经做了测试，然后他认为可以，他可以盖章。那么另外一个呢，你们就说，我就是给你那个加拿大的建材中心去做这些，他做出来他认为通过了，那么就盖章。那么就他们Moca 的那个 standard 呢，就是根据就是很多标准，那个 Mike 就是查了很多标准，然后做下来就是说我们需要达到这些标准，就这个意思。如果达到了，那就批准；达不到了就想办法。
China has its own standards bodies.
Yeah.
I believe they're involved in the ISO, the International Standard Organization, and so is Canada, so are many other countries. So the process of setting the standard is going to be a bit different, but it's not, you basically have the same goals. It doesn't matter what country you're in.
他说他也知道，中国也有他自己的标准， 也许它这个标准也会参照那个 ISO 的那个标准体系。那么他说，北美这边呢，有些不同，但是呢，主要的目标是差不多的。那么你们能够达到那些标准，那么到这边来也相差不会太大。
So if I understand that
还是
aspect,
没有，就
we're
是
interested in trying to develop a more generic standard as
没有
opposed
回答你
to
的问题。
manufacturer base.
没有完全回答，就是
Is
他
that
现在
something that there's an opening for, an opportunity?
Yes, you'd have to, if you want a CSA standard, well, first of all, it depends whether you want an ASTM or a CSA standard. Because,
ASTM is the direction I think we initially stepped
Um,
going, but.
ASTM standards are generally recognized in Canada and are more broadly recognized in the US. CSA has relationships with ASTM. And, the process is complex, and I don't know that I really want to go into the details, but it's a lot of work to do. It's not a simple process,
Yeah, as years of effort.
especially at the ASTM level. It's easier to do it at the CSA.
CSA would be simpler.
Yeah.
他就是 Peter 的问题，就是说，他就说，用哪个方法比较好？他就是，Ken 就 say，ASTM 呢，就是用的范围比较广，就是说你通过了这个标准的话呢，你们加拿大、美国都可以用。那么 CSA 呢是加拿大的标准，那么你通过这个标准就在加拿大用。那么 CSA 呢就容易通过一点，那个 ASTM 呢就不是那么容易，就是可能有点差一点，就是也不是说不能通过。
I would think that all the work you're doing now would contribute towards a goal like that, though, or do you have to adjust your methodology at all?
Well, you have to remember the work we're doing is primarily for our clients.
Yeah,
And so the technical guides are, as I said, they're proprietary to clients or exclusive to clients for the first 3 years. So in many ways, it'd be up to the clients who have paid for the technical guides, whether they want, during that time period,
yeah.
the
Some of them are joined
test.
Moca, so there's a
Yeah,
start.
but that, you know,
possibility.
but they would have to get permission to use that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And if that's the case, then the testing can become part of it. I mean, it's-
Peter 的那个问题就是说，他说现在你做的那些工作，就是他已经做了很多试验，对吧？那么这些工作是不是就是说可以结合在对我们那个 Moca 的那个标准那里头？他就是说他们反正是为那个客户做，然后呢就是在3年内，如果你们要做，你要交费。那么如果的客户是 Moca 的那个成员呢，那么如果他们说可以。 那么，他现在做的这个工作，都可以就是包进到你们那个Moca的标准里头。那么就是你现在刚才问的那个所有的那些测试的标准，都已经都有的了，就是 ASTM 也好 ，CSA 也好都有。他们主要就是说你们一项一项的把这些标准全部做完，就是这样的意思。
You mentioned certification bodies. Is CSA a certification body, or what is a certification body?
I'm not sure, I'm trying to remember what context I mentioned them in.
They were in the slide.
But when you're
labs.
certification body, are the ones that actually certify labs and things like that. So there's the independent testing companies, but there's somebody who comes around and says, yes, those guys know what they're doing. And those are usually nonprofit organizations.
So can you explain, like there's a Canadian Standards Council, but CSA seems to be a unique organization.
Well,
Where do they fit versus the Intertex and ULs of the
Okay.
world?
The question 的问题就是说，他想详细的讲一下，就是 CSA 是什么样。另外，他还有刚才就是有一个那个幻灯片呢，讲了一些，就是说一些实验的标准达不到什么 ASTM 啊，什么 CSA 啊这些，就是他们那些标准的那个实验室，他就说这种实验室你们要做的话，就是要认可的，就是说你肯定是可以做这种标准的实验室，那么就可以做，就那种。
There's a Standard Council of Canada, which is sort of an overarching body that deals, for instance, with ISO, the International Standards Organization. CSA actually writes the standards and administers them. So you don't see CS or SCC standards, you see CSA standards, or in Quebec you may see a Quebec-based standard.
So the CSA is has a linear relationship with the Standards Council of Canada, like
Yeah.
they're a sub-organization?
No, I think they're a separate organization, but they're members along with other people interested in standards.
And then
Um,
SCC is accredited by IAF or ILAC. Who's at the top of the hierarchy?
Standards
Council of Canada.
他就是
Standard
说
Council，of
就是说
Canada
在加拿大，它有那个就是标准协会，那么 CSA 呢，它就属于它里头协会的一个成员。
It's kind of drifting off topic, so,
Yeah, I know.
yeah, why don't you,
I can answer it now. The Standards Council of Canada is a government agency that accredits laboratories. They offer 3 levels of accreditation: standards writing organization, certification body, and testing body. Intertech is accredited as a testing and certification organization. They are not a standards writing organization. They want to be. The standards writing organizations are CSA, used to be CGSB, I don't know if they still do it, and ULC. And they're accredited in specific subject areas that they have competency in.
他就麦对这个整个那个系列他就比较清楚，他就是说，这个加拿大的那个标准协会就包准的包括了三种那个情况，一个就是他那个制定标准的，另外一个呢就是认可的机构，还有一个呢就是认可的实验室，比如说天祥，它就是认可的实验室，就是这样。
any more questions at this time?
我再问一个问题，它这个里边提到这个有资格的专业的工程师盖章以后的认证以后，产品文件就可以在特定的项目中应用。
哪个幻灯片
22。
？22 OK。
两种方式。
22 slides 22。
Slide 22.
呀，你想他详细讲一下那个？
幻灯22，你这不是有
对
其中一种可以得到批准吗？
对。
然后第一种这个经过这个就一位工程师就可以了。
This one?
Yes. So he would like you to talk more about the first one.
I don't have a lot of experience with the first route, but I think this is probably what Peter is currently doing in terms of getting building approvals.
I can talk.
So he could give you a far better description than I can.
因为他是 CCMC 的专家，不是这一个上面层面的那个，所以他对这些就不太懂。但是彼得就比较熟悉，他可以回答你们。
理解了，谢谢。
Are you going to answer?
Sure. So with building code approval, the way that we approach it is to use the services of an engineer or an architect.
他说他现在想要那个我们规范就是批准的那个方法，就是用建筑师和工程师。
So the design professional will review the tests that we provide them, and they will make a professional opinion as to the applicableness, whether those tests suit the end use.
他说他们会就是给予那个实验的结果给那些建筑师和工程师，然后呢，他们就看着这个结果他会做出那个他们的结论，就是说你这个产品可以用在我这个工程，就是独特的每一个工程。
They will then issue a schedule for a project basically guaranteeing that the material will perform as expected.
然后呢，他们就会就是用在他们的工程里头，然后呢，他们要保证，就是说他们这个产品的功能是一定要达到他们认为的预期的结果。
So if there's a failure with the material, the engineer could be held financially responsible for any costs or claims.
他说，如果是这个工程因为你们这个产品失败了，或者是这个产品用在那达不到预期结果，那么这个工程师盖章的这个工程师或者建筑师，他们就要负财政上的那个就是损失。甚至如果像那个石膏板，我昨天提到的，因为影响就是有人病，那就会打官司。
And almost every engineer will be protected by an errors and omissions insurance policy, which is very expensive and difficult to get. And so, in effect, the insurance company would eventually pay the problem.
那么他就说，每个就是职业的，就是注册的工程师在这里都要买那个保险，而且保险都很贵。那么如果是真的有问题的话，那么除了他们声誉受到损害，那么最终呢是保险公司给付钱。那么但是可能他们也失去他们那个注册的资格，也有可能。
Can I add to that?
Actually, I was going to add a bit of contrast with what happens with CCMC. So CCMC gives what's described as an authoritative opinion that the product complies with the building code. But when CCMC does that, it's taking partial responsibility as well. So part of the de-risking of going through the CCMC process is CCMC saying your product is okay, which means that in the end, CCMC may be sued if something goes wrong.
他就说，如果就是如果你通过 CCMC 的测试，然后他的报告说你这个产品及格可以用，那么在后来用了以后就发生就达不到预期的效果或有什么问题 ，CCMC 呢会承担部分的责任。
However, CCMC has never been successfully sued.
他说，不过呢，他那个就是 CCMC 真的有打过官司，但是从来都没输过。
I just wanted to add that, there are other variables that lead to failure. One of the variables may be manufacturing defects. The other variable may be poor construction practices, like the people who actually built the building did something wrong. So there would be an investigation, into that, and of course the engineer would be off the hook. I shouldn't say off the
They
hook.
just sue everybody.
Well,
他
yes.
就是
The
说，
lawyers make a lot of
就是
money.
说那个在工程里头失败的原因呢有两种，一个是产品的失败，另外一个是建筑施工的失败。所以一失败呢，那么就官司就开始打了。然后他们就会调查呀、检查呀，最后，然后工程师呢就会说你们都不对，就是因为你不对，就是这样。
John, do you have a rough idea if somebody, say Moca, wanted to do a wide-ranging evaluation through CCMC, kind of the budget? Because there's got to be a lot of crossover between backer or siding or different uses.
I'd have to sit down and evaluate it. The technical guide, it depends in part on the extent of those applications and how wide-ranging you're talking
Your
about.
list.
Well, if you want to do structural insulated panels, you're looking at over $500,000.
Well, let's leave those out.
Well, that's come down.
They can deal with those.
那个 Peter 的问题就是说，
No, I
他
just
那
said
个
over. I didn't say maximum.
CCMC 能不能够做出一个预算，就是说他对那个 Moca 的标准的所有测试，那么整个来讲能不能做出一个预算？他就是说，那么要坐下来详细谈，然后对每一个应用都不一样。那么比如说像那个隔热板，就是刚才说的那个，隔热板，他就说要5万块钱，就写那个技术指南。
It's not always the case, but usually I'd expect the testing to be the more expensive
Yeah.
than the actually figuring out what the tests are. For instance, I could specify a particular test for rain exposure.
Do you do the test or do the other labs?
It
accredited labs do the test?
depends on whether it's the first time through,
Yeah.
because often CCMC will specify whoever wrote the technical guide should do the first time testing
As you mentioned.
to make sure that there aren't any problems with the technical guide.
And that could be an outside design?
The technical guide depends on the subject. I'm not sure if this is really, but
We can do that.
yeah, I think we might want to talk about, but some technical guides, CCMC will get an outside specialist to write some of it, they'll get a researcher to write another part,
Yeah.
depending on what the subject is and who has the expertise.
Right, right.
他就讲的那个就是那个技术指南，就不一定是他那个CCMC 自己写，就是说其他的地方都可以写，他们会找一些就是说比如说有专长的或者怎么样去写给他们写，但是你们都要相信他们，就算他们本来已经有指南了，他拿来抄，他也会收你的全部100%的费用，他不会说只收你20%。
收费会不一样吧？那国家委员会写，肯定收费会高吧？
有可能。
在中国是这个情况，一般越大的单元收费越高。
They talk about the cost of the technical guide or the testing. They expect the higher level and bigger organization and the lab will ask for higher fee.
More expensive. The NRC's, as an example, NRC's fees are based on set hourly rates. And so it really doesn't matter who's applying, we have to figure out what the work is, estimate the project, and then give a cost estimate. The requirements are the same whether it's NRC that develops a technical guide or somebody else. It's really looking at the expertise. And as I said, we do use external experts, we use universities, we use forest product or forest product research laboratory in Quebec. It depends on who's got the expertise.
But you didn't answer the question. Is really high level? It's more expensive than.
Well, it depends what he means by high level.
No, let's know.
It's the point. I'm trying to answer that question. It's the requirements on a national level cover the whole country.
Okay.
And so I don't know whether an individual request to a local specialist is more expensive or not, but the CCMC, you do it once and you've got the whole country, rather than doing it over and over and over again, and building the relationship with the individual building officials, because it's probably a lot easier to get somebody to accept the product when Peter spent a lot of time talking to them than when he's going in cold and just saying, here, I've got this great thing. So CCMC eliminates that.
他没办法回答你这个是不是更贵和更便宜，但是他只是说就是说那个如果你通过 CCMC 的话，你做一个报告，你就可以用在全国。那么你通过专业工程师的话，你就要一个工程一个工程的来批准。
So I'll just state what we are hopeful for is that with the years of scientific background from China and what we are doing here, UBC, BCIT, and with other experts, that we can find a way to collaborate with NRC to get very robust scientific results and streamline the process somewhat. Because people will be buying the boards faster than NRC will be providing a technical guide.
Peter 的那个他的想法就是说，他想用我们中国的研究单位， 还有那个哥伦比亚大学，还有我们那个就是哥伦比亚那个技术学院，还有天祥，所有的技术力量集中起来，然后和他们在一起，然后就是尽量的看能不能加快这个进程。
Many of the applications have overlaps in terms of performance, which should speed up the process of writing technical guide. One of the initial barriers when we started doing this 3 years ago was that there was very little information available in terms of product performance or things like that. And our initial costing of writing a technical guide was pretty high because there was too much we didn't know. It's the same thing with the structural insulated panels. There's too much we don't know and it costs more. As things have moved along and we get a better understanding of the materials, then the time and cost of doing the technical guide drops.
Yeah.
他就说，现在比3年前呢，就是他们对你们这个产品呢知道的就要多很多。那么所以呢，他说，现在他们要写这个技术指南呢，需要的信息啊、时间啊、成本啊，可能就会降低很多。
So maybe we could take a short break.
Okay. I think that'd be a good idea.
But thank you very much for this very